Welcome back to the show. My guest today is Fran Racioppi. Fran spent 13 years in the U.S. Army, a good portion of that in special operations. I won't even get into all, Fran, you're involved in absolutely everything. So I'm not going to go down a litany of lists of things that you're involved in. You're an entrepreneur.
Not everything. There's so many more things I want to be involved in that I'm like totally incapable of doing and unqualified for. Those are the things I really want to do.
No, it's not the unqualified part, bro. I look at your schedule, bro, and I think that you don't have enough hours in the day, bro. So that's
no, there's never enough hours in the day.
So, but you are also involved. You grew up on the water. You are the performance coach for Boston University, the rowing club. You also are involved in an organization called Sail Ahead, which is a veteran organization dealing with the water. So then I have to ask the obvious question: why the U.S. Army? Why not the Navy?
That's a good question. My dad wanted me to go to the Air Force, actually. And he was like super disappointed when I said I was going to go in the Army. He's like, what do you mean? You can go fly airplanes. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not fun. You're like still. And then he was like, okay, well, when you go in the Army, you can go be a helicopter pilot, right? Because it was like all in the flying. He's like, and then I said, well, that's cool too. But like, I don't know, you're still kind of like a taxi driver. And I say that, and I'm backing into saying that because all of the people are going to be so mad at me.
I was going to say,
who are helicopter pilots who listen. And we did on the Jedberg podcast, we did an interview with Clay Hutmacher, General Clay Hutmacher, right, was the commander of the 160th, and he actually references that like their job is to get the operator from one place to another.
I was just going to say,
I wanted to be the operator on the ground.
Especially your job, you dealt with the best pilots on earth, man. So they would probably have something to say about that. I was just going to say.
No, tons of respect for them. Absolutely, couldn't do anything without them. So, and they can do a job that I would never be able to do. And so it's absolutely world changing organization in the 160th, and that's kind of what we talk about in that conversation. But anyway, why I go in the Army? I went in the Army because I was a journalism major and I wanted to be the next Tom Brokaw.
Okay.
And if anyone knows Tom Brokaw and can introduce me, please do, because I still want to interview him. But Tom Brokaw, he was my hero. He was the guy who was like on the news every night on NBC, on the nightly news, and I felt like he was changing the world. And I felt like he was so impactful, showing everybody. This was before the days of commentary journalism.
Right.
It was objective. Everything was objective. And he was reporting the news. I studied it. I was a broadcast journalism major. And then 9/11 was my junior year. Then I saw these guys with beards, long hair. They were riding horses. They, in my mind, were saving the world. We went into Afghanistan. We went into Iraq. And I saw what Special Forces was doing. I was rowing at the time, so I didn't do ROTC. And then I said, well, being a journalist is cool, but I'd have to move to like Bangor, Maine. I don't think I really want to do that and work like 3 jobs in order to sustain myself. But I could go be impactful now. And if I want to be a journalist, I can do that later on. And so I said, well, I'm going to go in the Army and I'm going to figure out a way to one day become a Green Beret.
Okay, so that was the plan from jump, because obviously there's a lot of stages to get to the Green Beret. First of all, how'd your family feel about it? You mentioned your dad, but how'd your mom, how did they react to that?
I didn't really talk to anybody about it. I kind of just was like, this is what I was going to do. And I'm not, I gotten better in my older years now about seeking other people's input and being a little less focused on solely what I want. But it was very much like, this is what I'm going to do. There's not really anything else that I'm interested in right now. And that was it. I'm going down to the recruiter. I'm going to talk to him. I'm going to go to officer candidate school. That was the application that I put in and was accepted for. And my mom, I don't really ever remember really talking to her about it. I talked to my dad and we just talked about the different service branches. And then one day I came home and was like, hey, I got accepted to officer candidate school in the Army, and this is when I start.
That's it. And so you're originally you're from the Northeast, still there now. So where's your first stop at once you graduate from BU? And then do you immediately get commissioned because it's OCS? What happens there?
Yeah, I was born in Rhode Island. There's only a few of us who've been born in Rhode Island, but every once in a while you come across from one. But that was where I was born. To spend a little bit of time growing up in Florida. We lived in Miami. when I was in like the early 90s. So if you know anything about Miami in the early 90s, it was a pretty wild place to be. Our apartment that we lived in was right on Brickell Key in downtown Miami. It had been seized by the DEA. My parents are builders, so they were like, well, we can fix the walls where the DEA put holes in it to get the drugs out. That's cool. But it was awesome.
It's like LA in the 90s as well, man. Yeah. I know.
Yeah. So it was like, super formative years, like late elementary school, early middle school. So I loved growing up there for a couple of years. And then when we moved back up north, we moved to outside of Boston to a town called Weston, went to Weston High, and then went to Boston University. And after I graduated, I went straight to officer candidate school. So basic training, officer candidate school was branched infantry, which was my number one choice. I had aviation, as we talked about, and at my dad's recommendation. And then the day they were like, hey, you need to switch. If you want to make any changes, today's the day. Then we're submitting your packet. And I said, yeah, I want to put infantry number one. And I remember the recruiters being like, are you sure? I'm like, yeah, man, I'm sure. Well, every once in a while in life, you get exactly what you ask for.
I was going to say, it doesn't happen often in that process, but yeah, right?
And I was branched infantry. And so I went to the infantry officer basic course. I went to Ranger school. I went to airborne school. Then I was sent to Fort Carson, Colorado to be part of 3rd Brigade, 4th Infantry Division. And so I went to a couple courses on the Bradley Fighting Vehicle. And then that was it. Yeah, I was there. Platoon leader, day one, showing up at my unit in 4th ID.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so a constant theme in your life now, and I'm assuming part of your whole life, your parents were entrepreneurs, obviously, as you just said. So leadership, you talk a lot about that on your podcast, and I didn't mention that you did Jedburgh podcast as well. We'll get into that. Performance at a high level, and then your Army career is performance at a high level. So what are the lessons that you're getting early on in that Army career? Because when I talk to a lot of people that get to where you got in the Army, Green Beret, whatever else, they say a lot of the formative leadership experiences they got were pretty early on, whether it was, jump school, Ranger, or whatever. What was it for you, and what were you seeing at that time that impacted you?
I agree with that. I think that your first couple of years in service are certainly formative by who you work with, who's around you, probably shapes you and the opportunities that you have. Mm-hmm. I was very fortunate. I'm an all or nothing guy, meaning like if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it to the best of my ability, and I'm going to do it right. Or I'm not going to do it at all. Right. And when I went into the Army, I was very much like that. I had come out of rowing, so I immediately, the day rowing was over, was like, okay, now I have to train to go into the Army. And so I bought Stu Smith's books. There were no books on like going into the Army or being a Green Beret. Right. There were books on becoming a Navy SEAL. Right. See, and now all the SEALs who I make fun of all the time are going to be like, I knew it. And I've talked to Stu Smith since. Actually, we're going to have him on the podcast. Oh, nice, and I told him, like, your books were like actually formative for me, because the end of my career in rowing ended right before my senior spring season, which is like the culmination, because I ended up having to have elbow surgery due to a fractured nerve, and where I lost the use of the outside of my hand. And so I was like, well, now I have to train my body to go to the Army. And what does that look like? And so I bought this book, it was like 12 weeks to buds, I think. And it was like a 4-week pre thing that you do. So it's like 16 weeks. And I did this whole thing and was in phenomenal shape when I went to the Army. And then I go to basic training, and it's like evident day one that I was completely overtrained. When I was like beating people by like minutes in the runs, to the point that like the drill sergeants are like, they're adding time to my run. I'm like arguing with them, and they're like, no, that's not your time. I'm like, I remember that I got yelled at. It was like because I didn't know anything. It was like the second or third day of basic training, and we finished this run, and there's like no one near me. There's like one or two other guys who were near me who were also OCS guys who had played like soccer, phenomenal shape guys. And they're like, they give me my time. And it was like a minute slower than I knew I ran. And so I immediately look at them, because I'm still basically a civilian. And I'm like, that's not possible. Right. And they're like, what did you say to me? Right. And they're all in my face screaming. And I'm like, nothing. You're absolutely right. My time sucked. I'm horrible. Meanwhile, I'm like in my head, I'm like, absolutely no way that's my time. I know my splits down to like the 100-meter mark
Right.
for a 2-mile run.
Right.
But I, sorry,
No worries.
I swallowed wrong. But I go, but I get there and I start to have these series of experiences when I get to my unit, which really started from my first day at the unit.
Mm-hmm.
And it would being 1/8 Infantry, which is part of 3rd Brigade, 4th ID. And the unit was getting ready to go to Iraq.
Okay.
We had about 6 months. So it was like early summer when I arrived there, and it was going to be November, December, we were deploying to Iraq. The unit had just gotten back from Iraq. They were in the initial invasion. And I showed up, and my battalion commander had just taken command, a guy named Jeff Martindale. I'm still close to him till this day. He had come out of Ranger Battalion, whole career in Ranger Battalion. And I show up, and he takes me in his office, and he says, do you want to be a platoon leader? I'm like, yeah, yes, sir. That's why I came here. I'm very excited to be in the infantry. And he's like, well, you were the honor graduate at Ranger School. Yeah, yes, sir. And he's like, okay, great. Well, here's what I'm doing. I'm firing every platoon leader in this battalion who doesn't have a Ranger tab. You're the first guy who's come to this battalion with a Ranger tab. So that process starts today. Let's go down and meet your company and meet your platoon. And I'm like, and I'm like not even thinking, more than 2 steps ahead. I'm just like, sweet, I'm getting a platoon, because everyone tells you, you're going to go to your unit, you're going to sit on staff, and I'm like, I don't even know what staff is, but now this guy's telling me I'm going to be a platoon leader. So we walk through the whole battalion area, and we go down into the company, and we walk in the door, and he opens the door, he walks in, and everybody stands up, oh, yes, sir, battalion commander, yes, sir. And I'm standing there, brand new, like my beret, like doesn't even fit right. And, my gold butter bar, second lieutenant stuff is like all shiny. And this guy comes up, and it's a first lieutenant. And the battalion commander looks around and he says, you're fired. You take his job, and walks out.
Points to you, says you're taking his job. Jeez.
Yeah, he's gone. He's gone. And I'm like, hi.
Right. It's like,
how are you?
It's like something out of a comedy, man. Of a movie.
And this is how it starts. This kicks off my career. So needless to say, the transition with this guy was as cordial as it could be, obviously, because he understood that like this wasn't really my doing. But that was it. I mean, that was it. And the battalion commander systematically, from that point forward, went through every lieutenant in the battalion and gave them the choice: go to Ranger School, pass, keep your platoon. Go to Ranger School, don't pass, lose your platoon. Don't go to Ranger School, lose your platoon. That was it. Those are the choices. And that's what he did. And I will tell you that when we went to Iraq in November of 2005, everybody had a Ranger tab.
Right. Yeah, you're not going to get bust down. That was a lesson to everybody. Good grief, man.
Yeah, but that was formative.
Yeah, and
about standards,
right? And then also having to, I mean, anybody that's ever been in management, man, having to deliver hard news in front of a lot of people, that's a tricky proposition as well. As you're in your civilian life now, you've got to make those decisions now, and I'm sure that's a tough call for anybody to make.
Well, I wouldn't have handled the delivery of the news in that manner,
right?
But he was proving a point, and I understand it, in retrospect, and I think it worked. We were going to a very difficult area of Iraq. He knew that, and he knew that the unit was only going to be as effective as the corps of second lieutenants, and that there is a really important point, because we tend to put a lot of stake on senior leadership. Generals, CEOs, majors, colonels, VPs, SVPs, managers. But at the end of the day, the rubber meets the road in organizations at the execution level, and at the subordinate leader level, that team leader, squad leader in the Army, the platoon leader, and then the special forces, your detachment commander. They're the ones who are on the ground every day. Every organization is built like this. Corporate organizations are built the same way. The people who execute the work sit towards the bottom of that hierarchical pyramid. And we often put so much stake in the people at the top because they have to be well led. You have to be well led. You have to have the vision. You have to have the clarity of thought. You have to have the mission, the direction. That all stems from the top, and resource management and all that stuff. But if you don't have competent leaders who can go out there and execute and lead their teams effectively where the rubber meets the road, you cannot be a successful organization. And he understood that. He understood the mission we had, the fight we were going into. And he said, my unit needs a certain type of leader at this junior most level to be successful in this environment. Right. And he had the courage to make that change.
Yeah, you were going into a dangerous neighborhood for sure. And speaking of that, 2005, as if those of us that were around at that time remember, that it was kicking off heavy at that time in Iraq. What's your mindset going into Iraq, and where's your first stop? Where do you go?
Fear.
Yeah.
Fear. And anyone who says that they're not scared is full of shit. I don't buy it. Yeah, absolute fear. It was what I felt. We landed in, you go to Kuwait, you sit there for a while. It's hot and horrible. Even though it was like November, you're still like, oh my God, I'm dying. And then we flew into, to Balad, to the airfield in Balad, Camp Anaconda. And, the C-17 does the whole, spiral down and you land, and it was like, oh my God, and I'm a second lieutenant. I'd never been to combat, but much of my platoon had been to combat. Okay. All of my squad leaders had been to Iraq or Afghanistan. My platoon sergeant had been in the Army for like 17 years at that point. He was in the first Gulf War. Yeah. He had already been to Iraq in a previous deployment. They were absolutely phenomenal. They were experienced. I still talk to them, a lot of the guys, to this day. Awesome. Because they were so influential on me, and it made being a junior leader who had the ultimate authority on the platoon so much easier because I could trust them. I could trust their experience. I could trust their capability. And I knew that we would be successful if my job was not to tell them what to do, but my job was to empower them to be the best leaders that they could be. And that's something that I've carried forward in everything I've done in my life all the way through today. That was so important to the success that we had.
And how do you, this is a bit off the military topic, but speaking of that, how do you carry that over into the civilian world where the motivations are different? The chain of command is different. I mean, there's similar structures, but the military is obviously very top down, and people are used to giving and following orders. So how does that carry over into the civilian world? That portion of what you just described.
I feel like I've been very fortunate in my career. I grew up in the infantry in an organization, as I just described, where I was able to solicit and empower input from the bottom up. And I never felt like, and I had commanders who also valued that. Commanders like, I had a first company commander was a guy named Kevin Beatty. My second one was a guy named Keith Carter, and Keith Carter's teaching at West Point now. They were absolutely phenomenal company commanders because they operated from a ground up approach. What mattered to them was the input of the platoon leaders and the subordinate leaders. Because I had such an experienced platoon, I knew I could value their input and take their input, and that would be impactful. Right. And that would help me shape my decision making. Being in special forces also teaches you that, because there's nothing about there's very little about being in special forces that is top down. The team and the inputs of every member on the team is sought after and valued, and their inputs are taken into the decision making of the leadership. When we talk about leadership, a hierarchy is put into place in any organization, not so that you can have people who sit there and say, I'm in charge, do what I say. You listen to me. If you've put a hierarchy in place that creates that environment because somebody's been there a certain amount of time or somebody has some certain level of experience, that's not why different levels of leadership exist. Different levels of leadership exist for decision making, right? And the decision making is very often based on risk. Now, why are more, I won't say older, I'll say more experienced people put into positions higher up on that hierarchy, right? Because they have more experiences. They might have more knowledge. They might have more education. But what they have are inputs, or we call it effective intelligence. On the podcast, we talk about effective intelligence, this sum of all the experiences that you've had previously in your life are aggregated now that you can draw on to help you base decisions on for the future. So that comes with time. So when you've been around a little bit longer, you've had different experiences, you've been involved in different situations. It's not about age. It's just about the things that you've done that correlate to the job that you're being asked to do right now. You could be a very young professional and have had a series of experiences that put you in a position to be at a senior level at a different company. But what happens is you then take those experiences, you apply them to your decision making based on the risk level that has been given to you and your level within the organization as set by the CEO or the commander or the most senior person who says, I can make any decision in this organization. This level can make decisions up to this point in time. And that could be based on financial risk, financial funds appropriation, meaning that, up to $1 million, you can approve. Over $1 million, this level has to approve, and so on. Or it could be based on reputational risk. It could be based on business risk. You can name 15, 20 different types of risk that could go into that. And subsequently down the line, everybody says, and this level can make decisions to this level of risk, and so on. That's why we create hierarchies within organizations, not to just have a boss.
Right. So yeah, that's always the trick, though, is getting that lower level, not lower level, but under the, like you said, the top leadership to buy in and to be comfortable enough to take those risks. I think it's a point that I hadn't thought about before, but I was thinking back to my own career about, it is managing risk. That is a good way of putting it. And once you've been through enough, you've dealt with risk enough. And so you don't get flustered as much, hopefully, and things like that. So I just hadn't heard it put that way before. So it's a good way of putting it, actually. So back to the Army career. First experiences in Iraq. Talk about that a little bit, because you're obviously not into your Special Forces career yet. So as a young second lieutenant, talk to me about the first time combat hit you, or what your experiences were once you get out of Kuwait. Talk to me about that a little bit.
The first firefight that I was in, I was terrified. I mean, I was scared out of my mind. I wanted my mom. That was the first thing that went through my mind, right? Hey, I've trained. I'm a Ranger qualified infantry platoon leader. I'm ready to go to combat and shoot everybody in the face and, close with and destroy the enemy. And rounds come in, that first time it was initiated by a sniper. A guy in my platoon was hit in the butt and exited out his lower leg and kind of groin area. And then that initiated basically a 4-way ambush. One of my squad leaders, guided by the name of Staff Sergeant, at that time, Staff Sergeant John Jarrell, pulled the wounded Sergeant Munoz to safety in the middle of this 4 or 5-way intersection, saved his life at great peril to himself. John later lost his life in Afghanistan, but a true American hero, a true inspiration to me, one of my mentors, one of my best friends. But yeah, for the first 5-10 seconds, yeah, I was like, I mean, you forget about everything that's gone through your mind into that training, because this thing that you've been waiting for and wanting, in a lot of ways, I wanted to be there and wanted that to happen. You're asking yourself, what the hell was I thinking? Why am I here? I don't want to be here. But then you got a choice. You got to act. You've gone through the training. You know how to respond to this situation. You trust in the guys around you, and then you have to take action. And so for me, at that point, it was about saying, "Hey, we're gonna live through this, and we're gonna take action." And so we're gonna move guys into different positions, and respond and bring in aircraft, start to defeat the enemy, and that's what we.
Are you around Baghdad at this time? Outside Baghdad? Where are you?
I was in a town called.
Oh,
Balad.
You just said Balad. Yeah, right. Sorry, right.
Yeah, so we operated actually. So Camp Anaconda was I want to say it was about, I don't know, 15, 20 miles or something from the city of Balad, and we were in the town of Balad at a fob called Fob Palawada, and that allowed us to operate in the center of that city, and then also on a peninsula called the Daluya Peninsula, which was where the Ba'ath Party used to go. That's where a lot of them had their houses. So outside of.
So this is mostly ex-Saddam elements, things like that. Ba'ath Party people. Okay, and then you're not. Yeah. Is this Al Qaeda at the time? Is it all intermixed? What are you seeing?
Yeah, at that time it wasn't. Al Qaeda wasn't extremely prevalent. That started to come. I mean, we hit Zarqawi shortly after, while I was there. It was a lot of sectarian violence. So Balad itself was extremely Shia dominated. The Sunni Ba'ath Party were on the outskirts, and so we had a tremendous amount of sectarian violence between the Sunnis and the Shias that we dealt with. We were a bit of an intermediary, but we were disliked by both sides
until they needed you to do something. Yeah, exactly.
Well, we got a lot of tell on your neighbor type stuff, which was hard to differentiate between that and, real terrorists who were out there, or real people who, sought to do harm, whether it be to Americans or the opposite side. You kind of got a lot of, in those rural regions, you get a lot of, hey, there's a bad guy in this neighborhood. He lives next door. Figure out that like they're just having a dispute over, a series of crops or water.
This guy's trying to date my sister. Can you take care of him? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a huge element there as well. When you get over into the Middle East, I think it draws on your, right away though. You got your political sci, your poli-sci and journalism skills, because you're acting as a diplomat as well, and that's also a big seems like an understated, especially once you get into the special forces region area. You're acting as a diplomat a lot of the time as well.
Well, warrior diplomat is the term. So that's a really important term, and that's something that even when I work with organizations, in corporate organizations, I talk about the purpose of warrior diplomat. Because warrior doesn't mean that you're a shoot him in the face person. Warrior to me means that you're extremely diligent and you are professional. Diplomat is part of professionalism too, but diplomat's more about getting along with people, seeing perspectives on different sides, finding common ground, identifying an ability to find a solution that is meaningful and solves everybody's mutual interests. That's about being a diplomat and doing it peacefully. Being a warrior is about having what we've called the relentless pursuit. In the global war on terror, we have the relentless pursuit to root out global terrorism. In a business, you can, and even in your personal life, you can have a relentless pursuit to achieve your dreams. Okay, have a relentless pursuit to be one of the best podcasts out there, right? Right. That's my goal. But that is the warrior spirit. The Army called it the warrior ethos. It's the never quit. It's the, the characteristics that we talk about on the podcast. It's the drive, resiliency, adaptability, curiosity. There's an element of creativity, emotional strength, effective intelligence, team ability. All these things that make people who make great warriors are not about physically fighting against somebody, but they're about achieving the mission, no matter the challenge, regardless of what comes your way. You are focused on winning at all costs. That's what a warrior does. Mm-hmm. And then can you be a diplomat on the other side of that everybody likes and wants to work with?
Right. And yeah, and unlike the civilian world or the State Department, you have to be all in one. And that kind of leads to, first off, okay, so how long does this first deployment last? Okay.
A year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you come back home. What is did you get a chance to reflect? Were you a different person, soldier? Obviously you are in certain ways, but in what ways do you reflect on that after that year?
I wanted to get out.
Really? Okay.
Actually, yeah. I actually wanted to get out. I actually said, I think there's other things to go do. I tried to branch transfer to the Coast Guard. Cause then this idea, like after I'd been in all these firefights, and this idea of being a pilot actually was like, that's probably
your dad was happy, man.
plus I had worked a lot we were lucky enough to have an aviation regiment close, and so we did a lot in helicopters, and so I was actually kind of like, I think this is a good idea. And then the Army's like, we're not taking any pilots. And then I tried to go to the Coast Guard because I was like, the Coast Guard has the best job. Like they fly the best helicopters out there. They live on the water in the nice, unless you're like ship bound, right? If you want to be on a ship, okay. But if you could get on the Coast Guard, and then I was like, well, then I called the recruiter, and I was like, I want to do a component transfer. And they're like, oh yeah, you're not the first guy who's tried this. We've met our quota for the next 6 years. I'm like, oh God. So then I'm like, well, what else can I do? And then I was like, well, you have this counter narcotics team in Miami, where I could do drug interdiction on boats. And they're like, oh yeah, that quota is met for the next 4 years. I'm like, oh God. Okay. I'm like, what else can I do? I'm like, okay, I can go be a FBI agent. So then I started applying to the FBI at the same time I started going to applying to selection. And then I went to selection, made it in selection, and was like, well, I made it in selection. I have to stay. I gotta go to selection. Now I'm there. I made it. I gotta go be an SF guy. This was my dream. Get back to what I wanted to do. Stay in the Army, not going anywhere. Gonna go be a Green Beret.
I was gonna say if you're trying to get out, what's the deal with going to, because SF is just taking that up to the highest level. So what was the thinking there? You kind of wanted to get out, but at the same time, you're like, well, because is that back to the personality of all or nothing?
Yeah, I think that the Army does a great job at every rank of beating you down in that rank and in that job to the point where you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. And then they're like, oh, hey, if you stay, we're going to promote you and we're going to give you this cool assignment and open up all these other opportunities for you. What do you think? And then you're looking at the pay scale and you're like, oh, so I'm going to have more years in service and I'm going to go up in rank. So you're going on diagonally on the pay scale, and you're like, or I can go do something else that I didn't know anything about. Yeah. Okay. I'll stay. They're awesome at that.
So but for the idea of getting into selection, how does that work in sense of, does someone have to put you up, you apply? How's that work?
Yeah, so you put in a written packet. It's all your records and your evaluations and your different parts of your official record, and then they review it and they say, okay, yes or no. We want you to come to selection. They invite you to selection. You go to the 3-week selection course. If you make it through, even if you make it all the way through, you might not be selected. If you're selected, then you go to the Special Forces qualification course. And so depending on what your job is, it's anywhere from 12 months to 24 months, based on, if you're a medic, there's a whole nother, medical training course that you have to go to, which drags it out. But for me, it was a year long.
What was your specific job?
As an officer, you only have one job. So the only thing you could do is be the detachment commander.
Oh.
And I would argue that if you are a detachment commander and you're trying to do any other job, you're either, first of all, you're wrong, and you're not very good at it, whether you believe you are or not.
Right.
Which is, you always see that on teams, like guys who are like, oh, I'm a gun guy, so I'm like, I could be a weapons guy. It's like, no, not really. There's guys who are trained in that. They went to school for a long time. They're way better than you. Yeah, great. You're a good shot. Doesn't mean you're a weapons guy.
Right.
So, but that's the only job. It's an 18 Alpha. It's to be the detachment commander. And so your specialty, your focus is on planning, and your focus is on resource allocation, and how do you understand what it is you're being asked to do? How do you break down the different components of what it takes to execute those missions, and whether they be, whether they're foreign internal defense, so going to foreign nations and training foreign armies, and equipping them and deploying with them, or whether it's unconventional warfare, or whatever it is, direct action, whatever being asked to do, you have to be an expert in being able to plan all those different types of missions, from the most strategic aspect of it all the way down to the most tactical. We're going to enter this room and this is what's going to happen. And so then you got to understand all the resource allocation that goes behind that, prioritization of those resources, where they come from, how you get them, and then be able to coordinate interagency and inter-unit to be able to actually facilitate those operations, and then work with everybody below you at your peer level, and then all the way up to foreign nations, presidents, and senior State Department and military officials. And can you work with all those people?
Wow. Okay. Because obviously they're, when you get to that level, they're looking for the warrior as you defined earlier, right? They're looking for all those things that make the relentless drive. Because I've seen, whether it was, JTACs or Green Berets or that real high level, it's not always the door kickers or the star quarterbacks that make it through that, right? And can you talk a bit about what you saw in Q course and then going forward in that world, in terms of what was the next step up in mindset, leadership, all that stuff?
There's a tremendous amount of autonomy given to special operations, and specifically, special forces in the Green Berets. You were selected with some things very high on the list, characteristics being very high on the list. Integrity being one, drive being another one, curiosity being another one, because you are asked, by and large, to go to places that are in far off lands, but that you may be the only one of your Green Beret. You may be the only military official. You might be the only diplomatic official who's going to go to this country or this area. And the expectation is that you're going to understand and complete a mission, and you're going to do it, and you're going to do it. The reports that you write are going to be true and accurate. The resources that you request are going to be within proper scope, and not under or over what's required to be utilized for the mission. And everything you say is going to be taken at face value for the truth, because many times those reports often make it into the president's daily intelligence briefing. Right. If you're the only person in a country and there's something going on, well, the senior most officials in the government may read those reports. Right. So everybody has to believe, everyone has to know that the person who has the utmost integrity is on the other side writing these things, and solving this problem that the nation has asked them to go solve. And you have to have drive, because when there's not a lot of you there, it's easy to say, well, I'm going to sit in my hotel room, or I'm going to sit in my room, or I'm not going to do much today. Right. And so you have to be able to wake up every day and say, I'm going to continue this mission. I'm going to find the answers to the solutions. I'm going to ask the questions that I didn't even know existed to get to a solution that this mission requires. And you have to do that day in and day out. And so what you learn when you go into these roles is that, number one, you're part of something greater than yourself. Right. And it's not about you. No. In fact, I will argue that at times it's it's too much not about you. but that's the mission that you've been given, and that's a job that you've accepted willingly and volunteered to go to. So you learn there's a greater purpose, and you learn that every decision that you make can have a strategic impact.
Right.
And when you carry that forward into leadership in business, you understand more fundamentally that you operate in, you know, almost what I call a four-dimensional space, meaning that, you know, your decisions have reciprocal events and repercussions, up, down, left, right, sideways. It doesn't matter. In every direction, you can and cannot predict what the outcomes of your decisions may be.
Right.
And so you have to start to think like that as a leader every single time you sit down to make a decision. But you have to act.
Right.
No decision is often not an option.
Right. Yeah. It asks a lot of somebody, and it really makes you step up your game. And to a lot of times, guys that are, you know, in their 30s, not in their 50s, after lifelong experiences and all that, you're thrown into it as a relatively young man. And that's what always impresses me about the guys that did your job and in other branches, just how switched on they are, because they have to be. You know, you're required. So much is required of you, and that's, you know, your brief, right? The oppressor libre. You have to be dropped into an indigenous force, and sometimes maybe from scratch. And I know you've spent some time in Africa. I think 3 or 4 deployments to Iraq, so you've had quite a bit of experience that way. Can you talk a bit about applying that into real world situations where you were sent to Africa or wherever to train up forces, whatever?
The motto of the Special Forces, De Oppresso Liber, means to free the oppressed.
Yep.
And why is that important? You know, it's important because it is the driving factor of problem solving. Right? We have an inherent right as a human being to be free. And that is something that has existed since the dawn of time. It's a source of conflict to this day.
That's right.
I mean, look at what's going on in Russia. Look what's going, you know, with Russia and Ukraine. Right. Okay, this is about a sovereign nation, and this is about freedom of, you know, individuals and nation states to choose their own future, choose their own ability to decide who they are and what they want to be. Look at what's happening here in the U.S. You know, we've resurfaced the Roe v. Wade abortion debate. Mm-hmm. You know, and now the argument about, you know, women's freedom to choose is now, you know, being questioned. These are civilizational issues. Okay, and the Special Forces came to be as an organization under this mindset that their single job, their role in the world is to promote freedom and allow nations, people, individuals, groups of people, countries, whatever you want to call it, the opportunity to choose their own future, their own direction. And that can be accomplished in a variety of different ways. Right. Through the core mission sets, unconventional warfare, the overthrow of a nation or occupying power, foreign internal defense, training others to solve their own problems, right. And equipping them to do so.
Seeing that with Ukraine Special Forces right now. Like you guys, yeah. you're seeing the benefits of the Green Berets right now, I would think, with the Ukrainian SF guys.
Yeah, direct action.
Yep.
Do it ourselves. Okay, there's a number of other missions that they do, but primarily they come down to those. So that's why that organization of the Green Berets and the Special Forces is the greatest and most dynamic organization in the world. Because there's one simple premise. Because what's the other part about freedom, about freeing the oppressed? It's integrity and doing what's right. And when you wake up every morning and your sole job lives with Deo Preso Liber, I'm going to do what's right for the people that I serve in my country and abroad, then you'll make the right decisions. And when you build organizations, when you build companies that are focused all the way from the organizational organizational level all the way down to the individual on doing what's right for the company, you will be successful. And that, regardless of where you operate, if that's the guiding theme, that's your central tenet that you abide by every single day, then you will create great organizations that are super successful in anything they set out to do.
And to the extent that you can, now once you've gotten through this, through you're deployed as a Green Beret now, do you go back to Iraq? Do you go to Africa? Do you go somewhere else? To the extent that you can talk about it.
Yeah, I went back to Iraq 2 more times as a Special Forces Detachment Commander. So I went there 2 more times. And then after that, I went to Africa. I went to Djibouti, Africa for 6 months in 2013. And I primarily worked in building partner nation capacity. So I went all around East Africa, identified components of their special operations forces or components of their armies in East African nations that could be trained as special operations forces to combat al-Shabaab. And then I served as the assistant operations officer for all of 10th Special Forces Group, so about 4,000 people across, at that point, four continents. And then I did the same job in Djibouti and East Africa. I did that in West Africa for a period of time, and then I was the aide to General Jim Linder when he was the SOC Africa commander. So he commanded all special operations in Africa, had Special Operations Command Africa out of Germany, and I was his aide.
Okay. What's your, give me your impressions from the time East Africa, West Africa. What are some things, doesn't have to be military, doesn't have to be combat related. What are some things that stuck out to you?
I love Africa.
Cool.
And I say it like it's a country,
yeah,
but that's why I love it.
Right.
I love it because all of our maps are fucked. So if you look at a map and you see this massive U.S. and then you look at Africa and the U.S. is like bigger than Africa, right on the map. Well, actually, like 3.5 U.S. fit in Africa, and like. I think if you you can take like all of the rest of the world, like land masses in the rest of the world, and they like still all fit in Africa. It's absolutely vast, north, south, and east, west. It is extremely dynamic. I don't even know how many countries are in Africa, because one day it will be 54, the next day it'll be 53, the next day it'll be 55. It all depends on like who's having a coup and who's recognized by the international, the international audience, and who has no government today because they, and so it's totally wild in a lot of respects, but there's also an absolute tremendous amount of opportunity.
Yeah.
It is a super young continent, something like 70%. I don't remember, and so I don't want to receive any phone calls or nasty notes from people that quote me, and say I was wrong. But it's something like greater than 60% or 70% of the nation is under like 25 years old. I'm sorry, the nation of the continent, it's like under 25 years old. And there are nations that exceed that. Like at one point, it was like Nigeria was like 75 or some percent was like under 25 years old. And you have mega cities. I mean, mega cities like Lagos. You're talking about cities of 25 million people. New York's like 8 million people live in New York City. Like 12 million people live in like within the 5 boroughs, I think are the numbers or something like that, or within the area. You're talking about double plus the size of New York City in square footage that is actually like I think equal or less. So like you have massive amounts of opportunity. The amount of natural resources that are there is absolutely tremendous and untapped. And you have a population of people who are getting more and more educated. And so what that continent can achieve over the next 100 years, really comes down to how well the rest of the world incorporates them into the global economy. Okay. And do we fear it or do we embrace it? And then how are the superpowers, as we know, the first world nations going to begin to interact with each other and fight over it, which is the scary part. because you're seeing that
It's
now.
already
You're
happening.
seeing
It's already happening. Yeah.
It's been happening for decades. I mean, China, going all in on Africa, and they're not going all, China's not going all in on Africa because like they like the African people and they want to support them. They're going all in Africa because they want to extract as much natural resources and have first mover advantage in as many countries as possible.
That's right.
And the best way they can do that is by, number one, investing in the country and building infrastructure. So the infrastructure is completely supported by China. And then they can drop thousands and thousands of people there to begin to have a foothold within society and culture. And so it's not, that's a 100-year game.
That's right.
That they're playing.
That's right. Absolutely.
So you're seeing that all over Africa.
Yeah, and did any country specifically stick out to you as kind of a favorite, or a city, or a countryside? Anything stick out to you as a kind of thing you'd like to go back to?
Yeah, I want to go back to all of them.
Yeah, right.
It's really that's a hard question that I don't think is an easy answer because they're all so different.
Right.
Because I've been to the Central African Republic, which is like, that is not a super modern place. And that is but I've also been to Morocco, which, you go to Morocco and you look across the Mediterranean, you can see Spain.
Right.
It's super influenced by, Spanish culture. And I've been to Tunisia and it's super established. And, but I've been to Djibouti and I've been to Somalia, but I've been to Zanzibar and, played volleyball in the pool, on the infinity pool on the beach.
Right.
So, they're all super different.
Right.
I've never been to South Africa, which, kind of sucks because like I always wanted to go to South Africa just to go there. But it's hard to answer that question because they're all super different and they all are different places within the life cycle and the evolution and the modernization of the country.
Yeah.
And so if you can be appreciative of where they are within that, then you can embrace their culture 100%. And you can understand their perspective and you can gain so much more out of being there and embracing what they're going through and become a better person from having spent time there.
It's a really good way of putting it, man. I spent a lot of time, over 25 years off and on in Asia, and been to India, lived in India a couple of times, and man, I just recommend it. Can't recommend it enough to kids I've coached and been around just for that specific reason, because it gives you an education entirely outside of books and an emotional intelligence, hopefully, and just expands your brain. It certainly did me. I mean, in a certain, now my wife would argue it didn't penetrate my thick skull, but in any event, no, I wouldn't trade those experiences for anything, just precisely because of what you just said. Because you have to sit down and break bread with people who think totally different than you do, and like you said, taking cultures and people where they're at, and getting into that mindset is really interesting. And to do it in the capacity that you did it is even more maybe intense and interesting too, because security is one of the bases of culture.
The problem that we have as Americans is we get on an airplane and we expect that when we get off the airplane, it's going to be like America. And the first thing that we have to tell ourselves when the airplane door closes is I have to be like them. Wherever I land, I have to adopt their culture in my way.
Yeah, right.
I'm not saying like, certain things you can't change. I go to India all the time. Like, look, like the reality is like I'm the 6'3" white guy walking through the town. I don't look at you. But there are cultural norms there that I have to abide by, that I have to embrace. And I have to accept that the food is going to be different. The language is going to be different. The accommodations are going to be different. The traffic pattern is going to be different, which if you've been to India, certainly is an eye-opening
I did rush
experience.
hour Delhi daily for months, and in Mumbai. So yeah, dude, it's hard to explain to people who haven't experienced that.
No rules. So, but when you can approach, when you approach your international relations that way, that's what being a diplomat is. That it's about going to a foreign land and interacting with a foreign culture and not expecting them to adopt your way of life, but adopting their way
Right.
of life.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, you can only ever be who you are in that sense. It's like you said, I'm not as tall, but I'm a bald white guy that I'm walking around villages in, Rajasthan or Gujarat or in, Asia, in Cambodia or Burma or, Laos. And you only are what you are. You're going to stand out. But if you can adopt that, I always take it to the level of sharing a drink with somebody or breaking bread with somebody. And if you can do that.
Not in Gujarat. You're not sharing a drink with anybody in Gujarat.
No. But if you can do that and start out from there, that's a good starting point anyway. And so I have a question I haven't asked before, but I'm curious given what you did. What was along those lines, you were in combat situations, training situations in places very different. And along the line of you saying about local customs, views of the world, etc. How did your concept of good, evil, and that change over your time in the service? Like, because you obviously dealt with it in extreme ways in Africa or in Iraq, and then seeing local customs, which I have before, that are sometimes jarring to Western eyes. How did your conception change of that? Good, evil, that type of thing. Or did it remain constant? Did the things your parents taught you hold you?
One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter.
Right. Okay, so I've heard that, and I've heard that saying before. Expand on that a little bit.
And what we tend to believe, okay, and potentially rightfully so. I'm not saying it's a wrong argument. Is that when we take 12 guys and we kit them up in a whole bunch of uniforms and a bunch of body armor and helmets and night vision and weapons, we put them on a UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter and we drop them into a village to go and conduct an operation, that what they're doing is viewed by everybody as an act of freedom, or as good, as an act of, let's say it's an act of good. Okay. Well, what about the people on the other side? Right? People on the other side, who are we? We're the ones who are crawling through the roadside, digging a ditch in the middle of the road and planting a roadside bomb and waiting for somebody to drive by so we can blow them up. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so to them, we're doing the same thing they're doing.
Right.
We're just doing it differently because we're better.
Right. No, better at it. Yeah.
Because we're America and we can. But that at the end of the day is the perspective of good versus evil is all in the eye of the side that you sit on. Look at what's happening in Russia.
Yep.
I'm not saying the Russian people agree with this. I've talked to a lot of Russian people, they don't agree with this. But there are people who agree with it. I mean, they're delusional.
I've listened to people in here that are openly taken, Putin's view of this, and have found ways to blame everything. So, and we can get into that. I'm happy to. It's just, and I have my own views, and you have your own views. But to your point, it's really been interesting to see people's justifications either for or against what Putin's doing, and how people.
It all depends on the side that you sit on. If you sit on a certain side of an issue, then the other person is a terrorist, and you are a freedom fighter who's doing everything in your power to make your way the general populist way.
Right.
And I think that's what you learn. I think that's what you learn. And you look at it and you say, we're very fortunate in this country. Barring some thing that they haven't even made a movie about, except for like the zombies, right?
World War Z.
Like no one's invading the U.S. Okay, like destruction of the U.S. is going to come from internal,
100%.
if ever. Okay, it's not, no other country is coming to the U.S. to invade the U.S. But are you going to tell me that if somebody did and they came to your neighbor house and fast roped onto their property and detained your neighbor, that you're not going to grab your guns and your safe and go out and hide in the road and shoot at them when they leave?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
You know?
And did that, how have you, since those experiences and those kind of realizations, revelations, how have you, kept your compass, your moral compass, or how have you grappled with that and things that you did that way?
Well, look, when you're there, regardless of how you feel, you have to make a choice, right? You're going to kill them or they're going to kill you. It's an ideological battle. And honestly, the ideology doesn't matter. Okay, what matters in that moment is that I'm here to save the life of those who I serve with at all costs. Mm-hmm. And secondary to that is achieve the mission. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so you have to become very binary in that thought process when you're especially as a ground force commander, which is a very, very difficult role to be a ground force commander, because you have to make choices. You have to make choices on resource allocation. Are you going to save lives? Are you going to defeat the enemy? What are you going to do to save lives, defeat the enemy, and achieve the mission? And so you have to, but you have to think like that. So it becomes a binary thought process, when you're in that, moment. But I think that you have to then, it shapes you, it shapes you to think about a more worldly view of things. But you cannot let that thought process consume you. What are we in? Look, you have to, if you elevate that thought process, right? And you elevate that thought process into where we are today strategically, in the world, are we in a battle of good versus evil? Well, I would argue, yes, we are. Mm-hmm. We are. And good will prevail. It will take time. It will be painful. It will be unnecessarily painful for all of us. Because I think there are ways to mitigate some of the things that we're experiencing here. But we have to preserve world order. Okay, and the world order will modify and change. Like it will. But at the end of the day, America is an idea. America is a thought. America is a place. The United States is a place. America is an idea. And it is an idea of freedom. It's an idea of liberty. Okay, and it is a idea of Deo Preso Liber, free the oppressed. This is where people from all over the world want to come because they believe in America and the idea behind America. Our job and the world's job is to preserve America and preserve that idea, that shiny city on a hill that President Reagan talked about. If that goes away, the world order crumbles into chaos. So there are still bad people who want to do bad things to you, regardless of what you think, right? And whether you're a person who wants to give hugs to everybody and throw money at everybody and appease them and hope that the problem goes away, okay? Or you're on the other side and you think all we should do is shoot people in the face and become insular and not talk to anybody and solve our own problems, right? The truth's in the middle. We got to do both those things. I'd argue we have to do both those things in less extremes. Mm-hmm. We don't need to be throwing money at everybody. We don't need to be giving everybody hugs. We need to be a little bit more diplomatic in how we deal with people. But we need to be willing, capable to violently execute and solve problems across the world. Mm-hmm. Because when we're not, when we don't, when no one understands or fears that America will impose its will and can impose its will when and if it has to, the world order will change.
and not to our liking.
And what people are failing to understand is that when the world order changes, it will become very ugly for freedom across the world. And you can still have freedoms at home. We can still become an inclusive culture. We can still embrace different perspectives and different ways of life. Okay, and we can still have women's rights, and we can still embrace ethnic minorities, and we can still have diversity and inclusion and equity, and we can still have a culture in which everybody has a voice that we embrace because that makes us stronger. But we can still do so by being a warrior who goes out there, and the world understands that we will never let freedom be challenged, and we will never let our position in the global economy, in international relations, across the components of what we call, the national elements, the elements of national power, DIME, diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. America has to lead across those fronts. Yep. You can't lead from behind. This whole concept about lead from behind is bullshit.
Yep. Plain and simple. That's anyway. On a minor level, it's like letting a bully take your lunch money over and over and over again, and
it's appeasement.
If you hide in the bathroom, it's going to go away. It didn't work for me, and it doesn't work on the world stage either. Yeah, very well said, though. By the way, man, it's interesting to hear that perspective from someone who's kind of done the warrior diplomat thing, both sides. Take me through kind of towards the end of your career. Did you know you were going to get out when you got out? Because you did, you didn't do a full 20 years, or what they would say a full 20 years is. So what was your thinking there? Did you want to get out? Was it a medical issue? What was going on there towards the end of your career?
Yeah, I think, eventually you think, when your time comes up, and, I certainly wanted to stay, but my family, my wife and daughter had, moved to New York, and, we were at that point no longer together. And so, it was a difficult decision to try to, continue to pursue a military career, or try to figure out, was I going to, try to go be more of a dad, and, didn't really know at that point what would happen with my marriage, or if that would stay together, or what we would do. But, it's kind of like I knew what the Army was gonna have over the course of the next, couple of years, and what that would look like. And, there were other priorities that kind of came up. And so I said, well, that's it. Let's go do something else.
Gotcha.
Realized that I lacked a tremendous amount of skills. I had a tremendous amount of skills, soft skills. I did not have any hard skills in terms of, I didn't know what a balance sheet was, or an income statement, or marketing, or business strategy. And so it made it very difficult to get a number of jobs that I really wanted. Because I would talk about, they'd say, well, tell me a time where you led something. And I'm like, well, there was this crazy time where I got sent to Nigeria right after 200 schoolgirls got kidnapped. And you remember, like, Michelle Obama held up a sign, save the girls. And, and like, then I was in Nigeria, and I was sitting there with like a French guy and a British guy and a bunch of Nigerian generals. And they were like, we don't have a problem with Boko Haram. Like, I was there, and they're like, we don't know what to do with you. Do you know what a balance sheet is?
I was talking about an office.
Yeah. Like, do you know what a P&L is? I'm like, no. I'm like, oh, okay. Disqualify. So you're not capable of leading. Like, okay, so I need to figure out how I'm going to close this gap. So I figured, best Army sends you to school every time they promote you. Or put you in a new job. They send you to a school, give you a core set of academic skills, and then from there you got to figure it out. And I said, I better go to business school. So I applied to NYU. I got in, and I went to NYU and got my MBA.
Oh, okay, cool. I didn't know that, but I didn't know that part. All right, yeah. BU, NYU. That's a little bit better than my community college experience initially. So you got.
In a lot of ways, it's a piece of paper. It's just an expensive one.
No, it definitely is that. Okay, so you get into your own company. Let's get to the Jedburgh. First of all, tell me the name, because I like I love the meaning behind the name, and then why did you want to start your own show? All that. Get into that.
Yeah, because I want to be Tom Brokaw. I already told you that.
Yeah. Well, Brokaw's
look, I really, I figured one day I'd always kind of try to figure out a way to jump back into journalism. When I was sitting at my mom's house during COVID, because we had a baby, we had an apartment in New York City, and after about 2 weeks of sitting in an 800 square foot apartment with at that point, a 10-year-old who couldn't go to school, and a newborn and a dog and a room and a half, it was like, we gotta go. My company had shut down during COVID. The investor pulled all funding, so I was out of a job, and I was looking around going, what do I do? And then I said, I should write a book. And then I talked to a friend of mine from high school, and they said, well, you should start a podcast. You like to talk. And then I said, well, what the hell would I talk about? And then I was like, well, I kind of am still paying for this journalism degree that I have from 2003. So I might as well figure out how to use this thing. And so I started coming up with this concept of podcast and what would I talk about? And I said, I want to talk to super influential people across a variety of different things. I didn't want to be a professional veteran where I only talk to veterans. I'd been an athlete in college, but I'm not a professional athlete. I was okay in college. Yeah. And then I said, well, if I create a podcast, I'm going to talk to super influential people around a variety of things. And what would I name it? And I toyed with some names, and then I was like, the Jedburghs. Jedburghs, okay. What's the lineage of the Special Forces? It's the Jedburghs. Who were the Jedburghs? The Jedburghs were a transformative organization in World War II that were put together in the midst of chaos, in which the war was by and large going to become a failure unless the Allies invaded France to unseat Germans who were occupying France. But the only way to do that was through the Normandy invasion, which was a death trap due to superior entrenched German machinery and weaponry. And so we had to create an organization on the Allied side that could defeat the Germans at all costs. And the way they would do that would be to parachute into occupied France starting the night before D-Day in 3-man teams with one mission: find the French resistance, arm and train the French resistance, do whatever it takes to prevent the Germans from reinforcing the beaches at Normandy. And that organization, after World War II, went on to become the operations directorate of the CIA. And then they subsequently, many of those individuals who were on those Jedburgh teams went on to become the first U.S. Army Special Forces and the Green Berets. And that was the lineage that I saw, was the tie back from me being a Green Beret back into the Jedburghs, being this organization that transformed the world. And I said, I'm going to interview modern day Jedburghs in whatever their industry is and tell their stories. And then I was partnered with the Talent War Group and Mike Sorelli, and they had just written the Talent War, released the book. They used the 9 components of the 9 characteristics of performance as defined by Special Operations Command. And I said, we can tie that into these stories. We can talk about how Special Operations mindset is what there are components and character that are involved in that mindset that allows people to be successful. We'll tell the stories of our guests through that lens, and we'll take it and expand from there. And that's what we've done over the last year and a half. And it's been an exciting return to what I always wanted to do.
And no, it's a great show. And I also, I really enjoy it. I'll put the link in the show notes so people can come find you a whole bit. But it just seems like you're, probably you couldn't have, I like to think anyway, I couldn't have done this, or maybe you couldn't have done that at an earlier age, coming fresh out of college without having the experiences that you have. And you have to go through that to be what you are. That kind of is an obvious statement, but it adds meaning to me later in life because, you have stuff to talk about. You have experiences that you can draw upon. And as you've been eloquently doing for the last hour or so, and you had to go through what you get to get to the Jedburgh now. And I love the name, by the way. It's if I could resurrect those initial guys, I've read a ton about them and interview all of those guys for the next 5 years, I would be happy.
Yeah, truly impactful organization. A lot of people don't know about it. We did an episode on it. Episode 15 was with Colin Bevan. Colin Bevan is an author. His grandfather was a Jedburgh. He wrote a very, very, probably the most comprehensive book about Operation Jedburgh. There's a few out there, 3 or 4 different versions, but probably the most comprehensive one was Colin's book. I don't think it gets the credit that it deserves. But you should check it out. It's really, really, really fascinating.
Yeah, we'll do.
And it was a great episode with him too. And we tied it.
Yeah, exactly.
All sorts of other stuff.
I actually started listening to that and then had something else come up, but I still have it downloaded on my thing. So I'll get to that for sure. And then, going forward, obviously you travel a lot, you're entrepreneur, the whole bit. What is talking to these people? If you're anything like me, talking to you, talking to guests, I come away from it every time inspired, kicking my ass a little bit. You talk to some very high level people in terms of in business and in the civilian world, sports, whatever. What does that show do for you?
The show motivates me. I interviewed Harris Glazer. Harris Glazer is the owner of a company called Midnight Express. They make $1 million power boats down in Miami. And he said, an entrepreneur, you're an entrepreneur or something. I won't get the exact quote right because it's been a bit, but he said it's the first thing you think about when you wake up, and it's the last thing you think about when you go to bed. And that's so true. So true for me. With I think with everything that I do, but this holds a special place in my heart, and a passion for me because it's what I always envisioned myself doing, when I was younger. It gives me the opportunity to learn from so many people. I'm so fortunate to have the network that I do and the support that I have in this endeavor. Jersey Mike's and Peter Cancro, the CEO of Jersey Mike's, have been extremely supportive of us. They're our title sponsor. They've made it happen. Peter was our first guest, really outside of the Talent War guys, Mike and George. So Peter was, and from day one has been a tremendous supporter, and I couldn't be more thankful to them. And we're actually going to be doing a couple of episodes later this year, a little bit more on Jersey Mike's and some of the things that they're doing out in the community. And I couldn't be more thankful for the people who have come in to support me, and support me, and not only the team with our production coordinator, Jenny Duclay, who's been a friend of me and my family. And you mentioned Sail Ahead. Her brother started Sail Ahead. So know her since she was about 12 years old, and very close with her family. And, she came on and said, I want to try to support this as best I can. And she's been absolutely awesome. We've taken on a PR. We partnered with Boston University to be part of their internal student-run public relations agency called PR Lab. And so they've been awesome. And so we had a really great group of students who worked with us last semester. I look forward to the next one this coming semester. But we've brought on Steph. Steph has come on as a PR coordinator. So she just graduated, and we offered her opportunity to come work with us. We have a full-time video editor. But until a couple of months ago, I was doing everything.
It's a lot of work, dude.
It's been a relief to bring them on, because I have a number of other initiatives which occupy my time, and I was getting tired of sleeping like 2.5 hours a night. But super rewarding. To answer your question, I absolutely am so thankful to all of my guests. We continue to have a tremendous lineup coming up through the end of this year. Really is what we're almost booked every week through the end of this year, and we've started releasing some weeks 2 episodes, short form and a long form, and trying to become a bit more dynamic. We just released new music. So we have a new theme song. So a lot of hard work. We've partnered with Ian McGlynn, who wrote and composed our first track. And so now we're spicing it up a little bit. So I sent him a bunch of playlists, and I was like, I needed to feel like this. And so now I've been pestering him. I think he's done a phenomenal job on the new soundtrack, and so we're super excited about that. And the Go Ruck games was absolutely huge for us. And so we're going to release a trailer from the Go Ruck games here in a couple of days, where we have a recap, which is awesome. And then we got a couple more events coming up this year. So we're finalizing the details. I can't talk about them yet, But we're going to do 3 or 4 more, big on-site events later on this year, and it's going to continue to I think, redefine what podcasting can be. I think we can have a podcast that is a media outlet and allows us to do dynamic things. And these on-site recordings, I think, are tremendously impactful. And I think it changes the whole vibe of it. And it allows us to really become to become a media outlet that can cover a variety of different things. Put it into a podcast form. We are up on YouTube, all of our videos. We're doing like 3 camera sets now on all of our videos. So if you haven't seen our YouTube channel, check it out. We suck on YouTube. I'm trying to crack the algorithmic code. I cannot. It's beating me down. So if you like to watch videos and you want to see what we're doing, go on YouTube, comment, because comments change the algorithm.
That's right.
And subscribe, and that would be absolutely awesome.
Well, you'll just so you know, your mug, and unfortunately my mug will be the first. I'm going to read it, get the YouTube channel going. You're my first video, so
good.
Yeah, I know how that.
Do it.
I've been looking at that too. So
you're going to feel my pain real soon.
Oh God, no doubt about it, man.
We'll have like tens of thousands of downloads on on the podcast platform, and I'll go to YouTube and it'll be like 4. And I'm like, oh my God, like this video is awesome. I mean, it's
all the work that goes into it.
Yeah. Like there's hours, tens of hours, like 20 hours have gone into creating this video, and like 4.
I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing with you because I have the same problem. I know. Oh, dude, I know it so well.
Instagram's the same thing. We'll post on Instagram, and like this just happened. Like while we're sitting here, my phone's been going off. I don't know if you can hear it the whole time. Like 2 days ago, we released a post, like 14,000 views.
Yeah.
In like minutes, like 14,000 views. That's real. Yesterday, basically the same content. 187. Today, like 14,000 views.
Yep.
I'm like, what is going on?
It's the machine. It's the algorithm machine, man. I'm not. You got it. It's sort of those things. You just do it because you love it. Because if you pay attention to that stuff, you'll end up. Well, you still have your hair. You'll end up like me.
It's still here. It's just a little messy. So
No. But at least it's there. You have a defined hairline. Yeah. Unlike me, I'm going for the broke ass Jason Statham, Jean-Luc Picard look, man. So, well, cool, man. Before we go, I always ask this question. Looking back on your Army career, what are, obviously we all have regrets, but are there any things that you would have done differently? And what are you most proud of in terms of that portion of your life?
I wouldn't do anything differently. Because you learn from every experience that you have, good and bad. And I don't think we can look in the past. If you look in the past, and I mean, sure, there's a lot of things you look at and go, well, maybe I would have not said that, or I would have, trust me, there's a lot of times where I should have kept my mouth shut.
You and me both, brother. You and me both.
But I, look, there's, I don't think you can't look backwards. I mean, I've been open about, a lot of things in my personal life that, I was, pretty shitty about, and, really, I mean, should have, really, in all honesty, should have led to my wife and I, permanently being apart, and it never got there. But that's a credit to her, not me. I did, basically everything in my power to make sure we did go there, but we, that has all worked out for the better.
Thank
now,
God, man. Yeah.
Thankfully, but I wouldn't be who I am if I hadn't had those experiences, and if I hadn't done that. And is it fair? No, no, it's not. But are we better, for it? Yeah, probably. Right. And so do I look back and say, would I have done something different? I don't know, because life's like a football game. I mean, there's a lot of plays in a football game where you're like, well, if if we had done that, this would have changed, but really like, Super Bowls come down to like 2 plays, by and large, like 2-3 plays. And if they had been different, would it change the entire trajectory of of everything? Yeah. I think life's the same way. You can always look back to 1, 2, 3 things that are in your life and you're like, well, if I had done this differently, where would I be today? But then there's, like I talked about, that 4-dimensional space and decision making. Yeah. Okay, well, if I hadn't done that, would I be doing this today? No. Right. I wouldn't. Right. And am I doing today what I want to do? Am I a chief people officer and doing what I want to do? Yes. Do I run the podcast and that's my passion? Yes. And did I just launch a leadership development program and team building program with a national gym franchise in retro fitness? Yeah, we just did that. Mm-hmm. I would not have any of these things if I went back and I said, well, I should have done this differently.
Yeah. Right. 100%.
I think what am I most proud of in my military career?
Yeah.
That's what you asked me?
Yep.
Yeah, I think working hard. It's easy to say, sure. I was a Green Beret, I was an honor graduate at Ranger School and in the Q course. Those are all achievements, but those achievements are not in a vacuum. Those achievements are not without others. They're not without hard work that came from me and other people that allowed us to be successful in training, in combat, in everything that we set out to do. Those were team, don't do anything yourself. Right. But what I can say is that everything I did to the best of my ability. Mm. And I think that benchmark is the most important thing that builds great individuals and organizations. When people say, what's your standard? Mm-hmm. The standard is the best I can. Mm. Because that's what closes the gap between what you perceive it takes to win and what it actually takes to win. Mm. And too many times we get into a situation where we're like, I think if I work this hard, I'll win. And then we work that hard and we don't win because it actually took something greater. Mm-hmm. But if I give everything that I have, every single day, no matter what, to the best of my ability, the result will justify itself. And so I'm most proud of the fact that every single thing I did to the best of my ability. Yep. And then you can be regret-free.
Yeah, that's right. Live with them. And then before we go, any organizations, we mentioned Sail Ahead, vet organizations or otherwise that you want to mention, and I'll put these in the notes as well, but anything you want to mention that way?
Yeah, I mean, I could go on, but yeah, no, certainly check out Sail Ahead. Sail Ahead, great organization. We got an event coming up here at the end of July. We teach veterans how to sail as an alternative means to therapy for mental health. There's a power of the water that disassociates yourself. We just recorded an episode this week. It'll release in about 2 weeks. It'll be episode 68 with Dawn Riley. She's one of probably the most famous female sailor ever. First women to compete in the America's Cup, won the America's Cup in 1992. Now is super instrumental in developing the next generation of leaders around sailing, but great conversation with her, about that, and Sail Ahead. Also, Green Beret Foundation, big supporter of the Green Beret Foundation, big supporter of the, Special Operations Warrior Foundation, who is also partnered with us on the podcast. Special shout out to, like I said, Jersey Mike's our title sponsor, Analytics, my company, 18 Alpha Fitness and Kevin Edgerton, and Retro Fitness, who's I'm now partnered with on this leadership development program. And, we got to get BU rowing back on the medal stand.
That's it. I see that.
It's all my plugs. Check out the Jedbird podcast.
Yeah, I'll put that first and then we'll go down the line, dude. Yeah. So, hey, Fran, thank you so much, man, for your time. Really enjoyed this conversation, dude. Seriously, I got a lot from it, and I'm go back and listen to it while I edit it and get more from it because you had some really, really good, and your experiences have led you to really think deeply on this stuff, and I'll continue to enjoy your podcast, man. I'm subscribed and listen.
All right, I appreciate it. Hopefully you can edit out some of the coughing and hacking over here that I had
do my
because I'm still battling this COVID thing, which is not cool. So,
Not cool
but
at all.
appreciate you having me on. This has been a great time.
Yeah, well, I finally got my shit together. I apologize for those that we tried this once before, and I didn't have my shit together, so we had to
It
reschedule.
happens.
Fran was cool enough to work with me, so I
I
appreciate
had
it,
to
man.
re-record an entire episode with a senior government official, so I get it.
Awesome, man. All right, well, best of luck, man, and I'll look forward to talking to you down the line too, man, because I really enjoyed the convo, man.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, man.